getting ready to, first of all, I guess before we get into Bible study, please remember, Light Night is next Sunday night, so please remember you can come dressed up if you want to, whatever you want to do, is perfectly fine, so please do that. The plan is, I believe the weather's supposed to be nice, so for the first time in a couple years, so I believe we'll be outside with everybody, okay, so out front. We would have been outside normally, but out front, so please remember that. Remember, and it's from 6 to 8. And again, I want to thank everybody who has signed up to do things. Thank everybody who has brought things. Because that time is going to, like I said, it's amazing to think it's already the end of October coming up here in a week. So it is truly amazing for that. Okay, so now we've gotten, yes, sir.
We need some cookies.
Need cookies, all right.
Put them in the bags with the ladies. And
anybody want to make cookies, buy cookies? How many?
I think I'll eat whatever's left over.
But if you can bring in cookies, any of you, again, if we don't get that, that's not the end of the world. But get the cookies, put them in bags so we can get those out. Anything else, Bill? Okay. And also too, if you haven't had a background check, please make sure the forms were. I don't know if there's still some over there. There were some forms on the table next door. If you have not had one in the last 2 years. Okay, so it has to be 2 years. And they're pretty simple to fill out. I don't do those background checks. Nancy does those background checks. So if you give them to me, I will give them. I'll let her know we have them, and she'll take care of them. Okay. And it's only if you haven't had it done in the last 2 years. So now we're getting ready here to in Esther chapter 7 is where we're going to be. We've built up to this point where we have gotten Haman. Remember, Haman went before the king, and what did the king do? Do you remember what the king told him? What the king was wanting him to do prior to this chapter? Remember, the king couldn't sleep, so the king read the records, right? And he read the records, and the king was like, "Hey, what good thing happened to this guy that saved my life?" Remember? Okay, and so he asked Haman. Do you remember what he asked Haman? Well, how should the person be what? Honored. Right, honored. And what did Haman say? You remember? Just paraphrase. It's okay.
Put a robe on him.
Okay.
Parading around.
Okay. His ego got in the way. Okay. So yeah, right. What'd you say? Put a robe on him and show him off to everybody.
Show 'em off to everybody.
Right. And of course, Haman's like, "Yay!" Because I know this is about me, right? He can't wait for that to happen. So let's go to chapter 7, and remember. They were at verse 14 that they had come and the eunuchs and the were coming to get Haman to bring to the banquet. The banquet. Now remember, banquets weren't that big of a deal from the standpoint they always party, right? Remember, that's how we started out the book of Esther. But in this case, Haman wants to do something. What was that? He wanted to make sure all the Jews were killed, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so he's got a little bit of selfish motive here. But let's start chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. It says, "Now the king and Haman came to drink wine with Esther, the queen. And the king said to Esther on the second day also, as they drank their wine at the banquet, 'What is your request, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your wish? Up to half of the kingdom it shall be done.'" Okay, so they're at their second banquet, and what's the king doing here? He sees his queen, and he loves her, right? She's beautiful, all this. So what is he saying? What'd you say, Carlos?
He's saying he loves you.
Okay. Well, he does when she's with him. Okay. What does he promise her? Half the kingdom, right? I think he really does love her. That's why he says half the kingdom, right? Okay, so this is what we see here. And this is the second time. Remember, this is the second time he's offered this up to her. Remember? The first time she came in and he said, "Hey, I will give you up to half the kingdom." And so now he continues to be this way. Now remember, we just saw Haman had been humiliated, or another way of putting it, humbled, right? So he has now been humbled. And now we see this here. And remember, he's all excited because he and he alone was invited to go with the king and the queen. Right? Nobody else was. So he was all excited about this. And so now we came in, and now Esther's going to speak. Now this should scare Haman. But he has no idea that she knows, right? He has no idea these things. So So listen to what happens in verses 3 and 4. All right, so remember, what is your request? So she is going to answer. She says, then it says this. Then Queen Esther replied, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given as my request, and my people as my wish. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, killed, and eliminated. Now, if we had only been sold as slaves, men and women, I would have kept silent, because the distress would not be sufficient reason to burden the king. All right. I want us to note, how does this conversation start out with the queen? How does it start out? What does she do?
Humble.
Humble. Somebody said humble. Okay? She's standing before the king, not as though she's entitled to anything. She is looking at the king as a humble servant, really, here is what she is doing. And she is going before him, and she does something here. She says, if I have found favor in your sight. Now, we already know she found favor in his sight. How do we know that?
He showed up at the banquet.
Right, you have banquet, what else?
He showed up at the banquet.
Right, showed up. But if you remember, he also... There we go. We stepped ahead of ourselves and before the court. He put his scepter out there and said, come, right? That was the first step. Then the other things were because of the first one. So now we see her once again giving honor to him. Now, if you notice something here, we don't necessarily, that when the king, it says here, Haman came to drink with her and with Esther and the queen, and in verse 1, and Esther the second day. And then in these verses here, she answers and she says, if this is what has happened, so who ultimately has the power of the kingdom? It's him, right? The king. It's not the queen. But I want to do something for a moment. I want us to go back to the New Testament. I want us to turn back to Romans chapter 13. Okay? And I want us to see something here as Paul is writing about this topic of royalty. And it's chapter 13, starting in verse 1. Okay? And I'm going to start Romans 13, starting in verse 1. It says, every person is to be subject to the governing authorities. For there's no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God. And they who oppose will receive condemnation upon themselves. For the rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For it is a servant of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid. For it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a servant of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. Therefore, it is necessary to be in subjection, not only because of wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this, you also pay taxes, for rulers are servants of God, devoting themselves to this very thing. Pay to all what is due them. Tax to whom tax is due, custom to whom custom, respect to whom respect, honor to whom honor. Okay, now, when we look at this for a moment here, wasn't Esther doing just that? Was she not just paying honor to the authority? Okay? It's interesting because as we think about society today, and we think about things that are taking place culturally today, and how our rulers contradict the Word of God. A lot of them. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So what does Romans 13 say to you and me about that? Because, understand this, Xerxes was a godless pagan man that she bowed down to his authority. Okay? So what does it say about us as Christians in 2024?
Supposed to give them the honor to
Yep.
their position they hold. Because God put them there.
Right? It's not whether or not we agree with what they do, is it?
No.
It's the position that it is, right? And I will be one of the first ones to tell you, I think there's some really winners out there. Okay? I wouldn't want any of their positions, by the way. Okay? But the reality is that, and he says why, right? He says why. He says because it's necessary, right? He goes on, he says because they are put there by God. Sometimes I want to say, what? What? Let's think about our nation for a moment. Okay, do you believe God can do anything?
Yes.
Okay, I do too. I believe that. So then if God can do anything, that means he can put mean, nasty, ruthless people in Washington, D.C. That's what that means.
You need
Okay.
to put the people in there that we deserve.
Yes, he puts in there, if you think about it for a moment, as a nation, when we turn our back on God, our rulers will be godless people. Because that's all we know. Right? I'm talking in general, not all of us sitting here, obviously, but as a nation, when we turn our back on God, and we have rulers that turn their back on God, who are we going to vote for? Rulers who turn their back on God, because that's all we understand. Okay? And it's interesting because this whole thing here, this is not about politics, this is about authority. That's all this is about, Brother Nine. It's about authority. It's not about politics, it's about authority. And so, who, I promise you that Mordecai did not agree with everything that the king did. Okay? Because the king was who? He was godless. Pagan. Right? And so here we see this, but again, it's for whose glory that's supposed to happen. That we're supposed to do the things we're supposed to do. For God's glory. Right? And I get it. Boy, it's hard to swallow. Don't misunderstand me. I'm just like anybody else. Okay? It's hard to swallow. But the reality is that you've heard what you said, that we get what we deserve sometimes. And we might say, well, wait, but I didn't vote for that person. Do you know in the Bible it doesn't differentiate between the two? When there was a good king, even the bad people prospered. When there was a bad king, even the good people, for lack of better words here, suffered. Okay? And so I want us to think about, here's this queen, here is this king, they're there, and she is coming on behalf of... I want you to understand something here. She was not coming before the king on behalf of God. Did you catch that? She never said, I'm coming before you, king, on behalf of my God. She did not say that. She said, I'm coming before you, king, on behalf of my people. Okay? Remember that. That's what she said. She says, I'm coming before you. Right there in verse 4. I and my people... She didn't say, me and my God, me and my people, me, my people. Okay? Now, I'm not saying she didn't believe in God. I'm just saying that she's not fighting God's battle here for God. God can do that himself. But God uses us to do things, right? Go ahead, Ron.
I have to think how surprised and how shocked the king must have been, having offered her half the kingdom, to have her not ask for anything that he would expected her to ask, but simply ask, what do you want? Would you give me my life? And my people? That had to rock his boat.
Sure. Well, right. He didn't believe in this God that Esther, right? He wouldn't believe in it. Not saying he didn't acknowledge God existed, right? But that's a far difference between acknowledging versus something existing versus worshiping. And if you notice here that she is not up there saying, I'm here standing before you on behalf of Jehovah. Okay? I'm not standing here on behalf of God. I'm standing here on behalf of myself and my people. Because I don't want to be destroyed, nor do I want them destroyed. Okay? Now, I believe God's behind all this. How about you? Okay? I'm not saying God's not existent in this at all, because that is not true. But here we see that she is there. And it's interesting here. Because if you notice the words here that she uses, in fact, if you look at, I believe, verse 4, it says that, first of all, they have been sold. Okay? Now remember, who sold them? Go ahead and say it. Haman sold them. King bought into it. Right? Okay? So they have been sold for a price, and allowing for them to be killed. And so we also see here that she had to speak on the other's behalf because no one else could do so. Guys, that really is the whole point of Congress. Did you know that? It really is. The point of Congress, the point of the Senate, is for people to speak on our behalf. Right? Because we can't go do it. So that's the whole point of it. Okay, and we know it doesn't always work that way, but that's supposed to be how it works. And here, this is Queen Esther. She is going before the king on behalf of not just herself, but all the people. Okay, because she knew that is the right thing to do. Now we see here that she's talking about being sold. It talks about these things. For chapter 3, if you go back to chapter 3, verse 8 for just a moment, we'll see this. It says, "Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there are certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of all other people, and they do not comply with the king's laws. So it is not in the king's interest to let them remain. King, it does you no good to let these people who won't bow down to you to remain in your kingdom." Isn't that what he just said? Most certainly did. That's what he just said. Okay. And the king, did he buy it? Yep. He bought it. Because remember, he let him make the decree, right? Because remember, there was an uproar in the city. And so now we see this there. Now, if you want something, okay, apart from borrowing something, money, whatever it might be, to get it, what would you do to get something? You cannot borrow the money to buy something. What would you do? Okay, what'd you say? Rob it. I heard save it. Right? That's the only other option. Either borrow it or save it, or not get it at all. Right? But why? Why would you want to save something? What's the reason for it?
It's important to you.
It's important to you. Okay? If it's important to you, then or me, or whoever, we would save up. Again, it might be finances, it might be time, whatever it might be, that we would save up to get. Okay? And so here is the queen. It is important to her, literally, to risk her own life to go before the king. Initially go before the king. Okay, this is the second time here with the banquet, but that she could literally lose her life. Now, I want to point out a couple of things here. There are 3 different times throughout the scriptures here that we have read where we find that Esther and others prayed. Okay? All right. So I brought this out this morning, and I'm going to bring it out here again. Okay? If you go back for just a moment let me make sure I find the right one here. Go back to chapter 2. Okay? And what I want you to do here is I want us to see here. I want us to see what happens here, and I want us to actually, you know what? I'm sorry, not chapter 2. I want us to look at something here. What happens with Esther? What does she ask the people? What does she ask Mordecai to do? To fast and pray. Okay. So she asked him to fast and pray. Now, is that good enough? Okay, it is good enough, but here's the deal. Esther would have never gone before the king if she didn't take actions with her prayers. You guys understand what I just said? Many, many times we'll pray about it and do nothing because we say, well, God's got to answer it. God's got to do this. God's got to do that. And the whole time we're going, God's got to do. God's got to do. He wants us to do. And the answer may walk right by us, go right over the top of us, scoot around us. Simply because we think, well, God, it's your job to answer. He said, and I did. You just weren't paying attention. Okay? Think about that for a moment. Pastor said, you know what? I'm going to sit here, and you guys are going to pray, and we're just going to sit here, and we're just going to sit here, and I'm going to take no actions with that prayer. No actions with it. Would she be standing before the king right now? Nope. Would not. And we have to remember that we teach that very indirectly wrong forever in our churches. Oh, just pray about it, just pray about it, just pray about it. And I'm not making fun. But if that's all we do with it, we didn't take it far enough. Okay? Did not take it far enough. Because here we see a prime example. She didn't say just pray about it and I'm going to go sit in my room and go lay down in my bed and I'm going to stay there forever and watch TV and flip through Netflix. Right? She didn't. She got up, and we don't know exactly what she did. The scriptures aren't that crystal clear on what she did, other than the same thing she would have asked the others to do. But the reality is, she didn't just sit there and do zero after they prayed. Okay? Have you ever heard someone say, well, I prayed, what else am I supposed to do about it? Take action. Okay?
Put legs on it.
Yep, put legs on it. There you go. Yeah, perfect, Jim. Absolutely. Put legs on it.
My
Absolutely.
brother have told a good story about that one time in Kentucky. They had a tavern that they'd been praying for it to close down, and one night it caught on fire. And went to church that next night, and some little lady was sitting over in the corner just smiling, and they was praising the Lord because the tavern burned down. She just smiled at him and said, yeah. I said, well, I put legs on my prayer.
We aren't going to go that far, no. But that's the truth. No, but there's a lot of truth to what what you just said. We can, again, we as Christians, we can say, well, I prayed about it. What else am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do, right? I talked a little bit about that this morning, if you notice. And here we are tonight. He said, this is exactly what they did. The queen didn't just go, we'll pray about it. Man, you know what? If I do what I think I'm supposed to do, it's going to make me a little nervous. It'd make me a lot nervous. I have to go stand before the king who might have my head chopped off. Okay? But she did it.
Mordecai had already warned her that she was going to have that happen if
Yep.
she did.
Right, either way, right. Absolutely. Yep, absolutely, Carlos. Either way, she's going to, there's going to be a problem for her. Exactly. But I want us to think about the whole idea here, guys, is so many times we forget to do the acting part. Right? The acting part. And that is just something that I just want to encourage us to think about. We have to realize that God uses you and me. He uses us, the effort that we put forth. He uses us. And He wants to use us so that others can come to know Him, see His power, see His honor, see His glory. And I just want to encourage all of us. Let us never forget that. That's what He wants us to do. Go to verse 5, please, in Esther chapter 7. And it says this. Now remember, she's in distress. She told the king that everybody's going to be killed of her family. Then it goes on, or the Jewish people. Then King Ahasuerus asked Queen Esther, who is he? And where is he? Who would presume to do such a thing? Oh, who's there? Had a big smile on his face. Not now. Right? Haman. Because remember, Haman thought it was all about him. Right? So it's all about me. I'm going to this party. The queen asked me to come. Nobody else to come. Man, I am flying high at this point. Right? Excited. Of course, he was a little mad, remember, because of some other things. But because of his pride. But here we see this. And we have him sitting there. And again, I want you to think about something for a moment. The king is a liar at this point, but he's not. Okay? And what do I mean by that? The king is fully aware who did it. Right? He is. Remember? Who offered him to pay him to kill the people? Who was it? Haman. Now, again, we have to remember, we can, Steve, you were in law enforcement. Just because you didn't pull the trigger doesn't mean you may not have been part of something that took place. Right? So here we see this that the king didn't necessarily physically do what Haman's wanting him to do, but nonetheless, he's just as guilty. But the difference is, who has the ultimate power? The king. So the king's going to be guilty of nothing here. So there has to be a fall guy. Who's going to be the fall guy? Right? Haman, the guy who built these gallows. Remember that? Yep.
Is it possible at this point that the king did not know Esther was one of the Jews and was part of that Haman was not the
No, because she said to him, I and my people.
Yeah, but that's now. But when
Prior to, no.
Yeah.
No.
Because he didn't call them Jews, he called them a bunch of people that didn't follow him.
Right. So he was very aware of, she made it very clear that she was part of that people who wouldn't follow the laws.
Now.
Right now, correct, now.
But when Haman first
Correct. No, not until this point. Right. That's right. And so here we see this, and she's like, well, who is it? who is this person and what's this truly, all about and what's going on here? And so verse 6. And Esther said, a foe and an enemy is this wicked Haman. Oh, can you imagine him going, okay. Then Haman came terrified before the king and queen. He was scared to death. So what does he do? He ran to the person who has all authority. Man, I've been like, I'm out of here. Okay? He wouldn't have gotten very far though, right? Because he was in the palace and he wouldn't have gotten very far. But here we see this taking place. The queen, she identifies Haman as a wicked person. Okay? He's a wicked person because of what he wanted to do. He wanted to kill all of her people, including her, because she was part of that group. And that's when he became very much a wicked person. Now, I don't think that the king here, we're going to go down to verse 6 and 7 here, and I want us to go down to verse 7 for just a moment. And I want us to see this. It says, then the king then got up in his anger from drinking wine and went into the palace garden. So now the king is angry. Because is Haman probably a trusted advisor? Good possibility, absolutely. He was. Good way of putting it, was. And it's never a good idea. It is never a good idea, guys, ever, to try to make the ruler out to be stupid. Make the one out with true authority to be ignorant. Okay? Try to play him, if you will. Because remember, he's not getting up for voting every 4 years. Okay? He's the king, and until he dies, he's the king. Okay? So he is not playing that game with anybody. So he's angry. And he is so he is there, and what do you think? How do you think Haman's feeling right now?
He's scared.
Yeah. Yep. He's scared. He's probably going right, feeling that neck, right, to see what's happening. And as we think about this, he is caught dead to rights. There's no lying his way out of this one, talking himself out of this one, sneaking out, right? As much as he probably wanted to. But what is he probably hoping for? Grace. Hoping that the king, who he'd spent time with, would give him grace. But I want you to know that I really do believe that the king really did love Esther. Okay? I want you to, let's go on. Let's look here. Okay? Remember, verse 7, he's in the garden. But Haman stayed to beg for his life from the queen. Guys, don't ever put yourself in a situation where you're in a room by yourself with a woman who's not your wife. And here's a good example of what can happen. You will lose your life. Just saying. Okay?
You already made your husband, man.
Yeah, you've already done it. Okay? But listen, for he saw that harm had been determined against him by the king. Now when the king returned from the palace garden in the palace where he had been drinking wine, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, will he even assault the queen with me in the house? And the word went out of the king's mouth, and they covered Haman's face. Now, I want us to think about what I just read to you. We don't have any information given to this that the reason Haman was hung was because of the edict. He was hung because he dared touch the queen on the couch. I'm serious. Did you read that? I'll read it to you. Did you see it? It was never said because he made the edict to kill the Jewish people. Now, mind you, the king was thinking about it, right? We know that because he went off in anger. We know that. But when he walked back in, he's like, you're trying to molest and touch my wife. You're dead. You're dead. Isn't that what happened? Think about it. That's literally what happened. Then he came out. He said, you're dead. You're a dead man. Okay? On top of you tricked me, right? On top of that, all this other stuff you did. Now you are on the same couch with my wife. You're a dead man. Okay? And that's exactly what happened. That literally is there. She identified him as the enemy. She identified him in there. Haman is like, you know what? I got to figure this out. I'm hoping maybe I can go to the queen. The queen will be forgiving, right? I mean, she's got to be forgiving because, you know, I have to get forgiveness. And I mean, after all, I mean, she got forgiveness when she walked before the king, and she wasn't supposed to walk before the king without being announced and all these things. Come on, she's got to do something. But wasn't the queen part of the group of people that she could hear and she could see that all of Susa was in an uproar because of the edict? And so now we see this. I want us to see something. I hope all of us realize you can't tell a billionaire anything. Okay? And I don't care who they are. It'll make no difference. You can't tell them anything. All right. What you also can't do is tell a haughty person anything because they think they have more power than you do. Okay? Haman thought he was better than those Jews. Haman thought he was better than those Jews, than those people that wouldn't bow down to him. He was so stuck on himself. He was so prideful of himself. He had been invited to these banquets, and I'm sure I'm invited to these banquets because I'm important. Right? I'm important, and there's no way an important person's going to have the king turn on him. Don't get on the same couch with the queen, okay? You're going to have probably been a good starter for you. But that's exactly what happened. Right? And now we see this. He's there in verse 7. He is pleading. Don't let this happen to me. Don't let this happen to poor me. Now all of a sudden he cares. You ever meet people like that? They get caught and all of a sudden they care. Right? They care beforehand. See, I'm a firm believer that most people who get arrested, they don't care. They don't care what they did. They care because they got caught. Okay? And so here he is. He doesn't care about the edict. He cares because he got caught, and now he knows the hammer is going to swing the other direction now. You know, and so he doesn't have a lot of choice here. But I've got to figure out to go to the next person who obviously has some sway over the king because she's having a banquet before him. She was allowed to stand before him, and if I can just get in with this queen, if I can just say, "Hey, you know what? I am going to do this now." Remember. When the king heard about what Haman did, what was his first reaction? What happened?
He stormed out.
He stormed out. Okay, he stormed out. Now, what can happen to us when we have a moment when we storm out, and then we make a decision while we're storming out?
And drunk.
What's that?
And drunk.
Uh-huh. And drunk. That's true. You're right. And drunk. You're right.
Seems like he made most of his decisions while he was drunk.
Yep. Think about how much trouble we can get ourselves into. Not thinking things through, right? You guys know when you go in for certain tests, if they make you sign a piece of paper that says you can't sell anything, you can't make any legal decisions and all that kind of stuff. Okay. Well, here's this case here. He is out there, man. And then he comes back in. By the way, you're right, Steve. He's drunk, coming back in, angry, coming back in, and there's Haman. He thought was making moves on his wife, but wasn't. What was he doing? Begging for his life. But guess what? Like I said, not a good idea to try to beg for the queen when the king's, just not a good idea. And so we're going to find out what happened here. Again, Haman finally comes to that realization, and he realized just how quickly things can turn.
What option did he have?
He didn't. Well, you're right. That's true. You're right.
Really?
I mean, his thinking was not to do. He wasn't going to try to, to do anything with Esther. He was hoping that he could get, in that personal space where she could see the person that he is, and hope that she could have forgiveness. Right. But the problem was what had gone out, the edict. All right. It didn't make any difference if Esther, said, "Hey, you know what? I forgive you. You're right. I was a dumb thing. I shouldn't have done that." But the fact was, the edict still went out. It couldn't be changed. Even if they all, saying kumbaya around a fire and hug each other, it wouldn't have made any difference. Right? because the laws can't be changed. Okay? So here we see that all of a sudden we got Haman, who the king liked, to the king can't wait to destroy. In fact, he tells them there, he says, what did he say? He says, grab him, put a bag over his head, and lead him out. Right? That's literally what happened. Now remember, the king is suspecting that Haman was trying to hurt his wife. Okay? Again, you're right, Steve. He was drunk. That didn't help. He was angry. That didn't help. But irrelevant here, again, we don't know if this potentially could have changed anything on its own, from a human perspective. God was in control. God was going to have this taking place no matter what. Haman was going to lose his life no matter what. But boy, it would have been a lot easier for Haman if there wasn't alcohol involved, there wasn't anger involved, and he didn't get on the same couch as the queen. You know, but he by the way, he was part of the party too, right? So we don't know how he was. He could have been just, the odds are not as, drunk as potentially as he could have been, but nonetheless they were drinking wine. We read that right there in verse 1. So now we see in verses 9 and 10, it says this to us. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs who stood before the king, said, indeed, behold, the wooden gallows standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high. Listen to this. I want you to hear this. Which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good in behalf of the king. Boy, this guy's rubbing it in now. Okay? No, I don't think so either. And the king said, hang him on it. I want you to know there's a lot of irony that takes place with Haman and his interaction with Mordecai and his interactions with the king. Okay? And he goes on, so they hanged Haman on the wooden gallows which he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided. All right. Now, I find it kind of interesting here because it obviously was known why Haman built the gallows. Okay? We just read it. Okay, he just said that he built for...
He built them so he could be hung?
Yeah, so he can be hung. Yeah. Okay? All right, now, so, these things are up... there was only one reason only for those gallows. And it wasn't for Haman, it was for Mordecai, right? That was the only reason.
I think you got it backwards.
Okay? Well, according to Haman, that was it. It was his only intention was not to die on it, right? His intentions were somebody else to die that he could watch. Okay?
That man didn't plan.
No, he didn't plan very good, did he? He kind of failed. He kind of failed that test, didn't he? All right? Now,
So he was the D student?
He maybe a D, yeah, or maybe closer to F student. He didn't think that one through. So now we see this. Now, I can't help but to think about. I always hear phrases. You have to love. Election years. Okay. Because, have you guys heard this phrase lately? Ready for this? Okay, here it is. Election interference. You guys heard that phrase at all in the last several months? Okay. All right. I find it very interesting and hypocritical of America because America always tries to interfere with other people's election, but how dare you do it to America? Did you guys know that? We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to Israel to get Netanyahu booted. But that's okay for us to do, but nobody better try to do the same thing to America. That's hypocrisy at its greatest. Okay? All right. And why did I bring that out? Because we had hypocrisy at its greatest with Haman. At its greatest. Okay? I'm going to do this to you, but you're not going to do it to me. I'm going to build this for you, but not for me. And here he is, the hypocrisy that's there. And ultimately, he gets punished in a very, very bad way to die. Hung with a rope around his neck. Okay? I can't think of any other probably worse way to die than maybe a cross or drowning or something like that. Torture, okay? And because you don't die immediately, right? When you're hung here. So here he is. We see this, just the whole idea of this whole horrible thing that I'm going to do it to you, but you can't do it to me scenario that we have. And here we see the gallows and that they were finished. I find it interesting that we just had a death, right? we had Haman put up on the gallows, and then we won't go there tonight, but verse 8 starts out, I love this, verse 8 starts out and says, oh, by the way, on that day King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther and to Mordecai. He just take his house. There's like no sympathy here whatsoever from the king at all. All right, he says, you know what? And who gets promoted? You remember? Mordecai. Okay, because Mordecai was ultimately on the king's side. Because remember, if Mordecai didn't respect the king, he would never turn in the people who tried to kill the king. Okay, so he did. I want to find it interesting here that it took less than 24 hours from when Haman built the gallows, when Haman thought everything was going great for him to get rid of these people, 24 hours to be completely reversed. 24 hours that he was going to be put to death. But there's three things that I want us to learn from this chapter. There's three things. Number one is that God's providence. Okay, the power of God's providence. What are miracles? Okay, so, and I completely agree. So let's look at this whole thing here for just a moment with Mordecai, with Haman, and with Esther. Did we not just read a miracle? We did. Absolutely we did. I can't explain how all of a sudden this just took place, other than who's involved. God, God's providence, God's power. He was all these things. He didn't. Here's the thing: is that he didn't have to have this big star. You know, sometimes I think we have to have this big event in our life in order to think that God is working or doing something. In the Old Testament, usually what would happen when God was speaking? What would usually happen? Who would do it as speaking? Angels or prophets. And they would come in and they'd say who they were. Remember, they would bow down. They'd say, no, get up and all this. Who came and spoke to the shepherds in the field in Luke chapter 2? Angels. You see, sometimes we want to have things like that. I've heard people say before, God, you have to prove to me you're real. Isn't that funny? Right? You have to prove to me that you're real. And I was thinking about these things. The only thing that God used with this whole scenario through the first 7 chapters of Esther were people. There was no supernatural star or, some tidal wave or there was nothing. It was simply God's power working through people. Now, I'm going to make an assumption here, and I'm going to say this, that all of us sitting here tonight believe God can do anything. Am I right? So that means if God can do anything, He can work through you, work through me the same way He did here in these chapters, Esther, that we read. He's the very same God, isn't He? I mean, the very same God. And that is the neat thing about that. And even when we might think that we're insufficient, guys, there are things that I believe God would have for us to do if we would simply convince ourselves that we're capable. I know I've shared this with you before, but guys, I thought it was the stupidest thing in the world to take a communications class in college. It was like the stupidest thing I ever had. Why do I have to give a speech? You guys know what I'm talking about? You guys go to college have to do that? Like everybody in that state, usually their freshman year, they took speech. I believe it's called Communications 101, I think. And like, why? And then think about the why, because God can use your words and my words to make a difference in people's lives. And so here we see this without again, there was no supernatural power taking place like we think of a wall being, knocked over. There was no donkey talking here. This was simply God using people to get this done. The second thing here is the importance of trusting God. You heard me talk about this morning. The importance of trusting God. And it's important, really. I mean, it's important to trust God. Am I right? I mean, it is. It's so important. I mean, here we see Esther, here we see Mordecai. They trusted God even when they felt as though there potentially was no hope. No hope. Right? And it's hard to explain to people who feel like God always lets them down. That God doesn't. It's hard to explain to people sometimes that we're supposed to learn through tragedies and horrible things. And it's hard to explain that, but God works in mysterious ways. God works in ways in which what He's doing, He's teaching us something. And that's something we need to remember. He wants you to learn something through tragedy, through good experience and bad experiences. Even when at that moment it may not seem like it's possible. But He does. And here we have, I mean, think how, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, if we were there together or in this situation with Esther and Mordecai, how many of us may have done something like this? 1 to 10, 10 being the highest. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? They're going to kill us. They're going to kill us. There's nothing we can do about it. What are you going to do? Probably more higher than we think. But yet, Esther and Mordecai didn't. And do you know what it did? It saved the whole nation. It did, didn't it, Jim? It saved the whole nation because the edict was going to wipe them out. Right? Saved the whole nation. And the third thing is justice. Okay? I can't explain, nor do I even want to try to explain, why doesn't God kill an evil person as soon as they do their evil crime? We'd all be dead.
Give them a chance to repent.
Well, we'd all be dead because we're all evil, no good. But why do murderers get away with stuff? Why do rapists get away with stuff? But they don't, do they? Did Haman get away with anything? He thought he was going to. He did. But you see, God's justice is always right, and it's always on His time. So I just want us to close right there. But God wants us to trust Him. Okay? All right, I'm going to close there. Please remember, don't forget, next Sunday evening is Light the Night. So this will all be changed around next week over here. There'll be no services online next week because of that. But please come on back Wednesday night as we study, and then, of course, for next Sunday. Let's take a moment. Let's pray. Father God, I thank You for all that You do for us. Lord, I thank You for who You are. Lord God, I pray that we will be faithful. Lord, that we'll honor You, we'll serve You, and follow You. Lord, I truly do thank You for everyone that's here tonight, Lord. Use us to make a difference in someone's life tonight. And I ask these things in Your name. Amen.